Have you ever stopped to think about how two brilliant ancient civilizations could end up with ways of fighting that were, well, complete polar opposites? We're talking about ancient Greece and China. Today we're going to try and solve a really cool historical puzzle. Why one society perfected this brutal, head-on, shield wall kind of war, while the other basically mastered the art of winning before the battle even started. We're going to dive into this fantastic analysis that suggests the answer is way more surprising and a lot more relevant to our world than you might think. So here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll meet our two very different warriors. Then we'll uncover what this analysis calls the master key that explains everything. We'll look at Greece, then we'll look at China. After that, we'll tackle that huge question about culture. Is it the cause or the effect? And finally, we'll connect all of this to why it still really matters today. Okay, let's just jump right in. To really get what this puzzle is all about, we have to meet the main characters. You see, on the battlefield of history, you've got these two iconic figures who could not be more different.
So on one side of the world, you have the Greek hoplite. This guy is a citizen soldier, right? He's covered in heavy bronze, standing shoulder to shoulder with his buddies in this terrifying wall of shields and spears called a phalanx. For him, war is a straight line. It's all about raw courage, pure physical power, and just this brutal head-on collision. Now contrast that with the Chinese strategist. He's not just a general, he's a philosopher of war. He sees the battlefield like a giant chessboard, and warfare is a game of wits, not just muscle. Victory for him comes from outthinking, outmaneuvering, and tricking the enemy, ideally without even having a big, bloody fight.
Now, you're probably thinking, okay, well, one's Greece, one's China, of course they're different, but here's what makes it a real head-scratcher. The societies themselves were incredibly similar. I mean, both were made up of all these fiercely competitive city-states that were constantly fighting each other just to survive. Both were farming societies. And both went through this huge shift from a world of myths and gods to an age of reason and philosophy.
And that right there is the big question. With so many things in common, how on earth do you end up with such wildly different results? It's kind of like planting two almost identical seeds in very similar soil, but one grows into a huge, rigid oak tree, and the other grows into this complex, flexible network of vines. There has to be some hidden variable, something deep down that's making all the difference.
And the theory we're exploring here says there is a hidden variable, a single, powerful idea that acts like a master key and unlocks this whole mystery. And it argues the answer isn't found on the battlefield at all. It's found in who holds the power. This master key is called the locus of political power. Just think of it like a slider or a spectrum. On one end, the power to actually go to war, to get the people, the money, the weapons, it all rests with the citizens, with society as a whole. On the other end of the spectrum, all that power is concentrated in the hands of one central state, like a king or an emperor, and where a civilization falls on this line, well, that changes everything. And this lays out the two extremes perfectly. So, ancient Greece, they're way over on the societal control side of the spectrum. Power was spread out. The citizens were farmers and merchants who owned their own stuff, their own weapons, and they made decisions together. Then you have ancient China during its Warring States period. They are the textbook example of state control. The monarch, the emperor, owned everything and everyone. Power was absolute. So you can see how this creates a kind of domino effect, right? First, the locus of power decides who controls the resources. That, in turn, dictates what your military options even are. It puts constraints on you. Then, because these states are fighting for survival, they have to pick the most efficient option they have. And boom, that one choice ends up shaping the entire personality of how that society goes to war. It's a really elegant and powerful idea.
All right, so let's put this theory to the test. First stop, ancient Greece. This is a world where, for the most part, the power really did belong to the people.
So because power was spread out among all these citizens, a Greek city-state had some major limitations when it came to war. Think about it. There was no central government to tax everyone and pay for a full-time professional army. The soldiers were the citizens themselves, and they had farms and shops to run. They couldn't just take a year off to train. Plus, each guy had to buy his own super expensive armor and weapons. And there was no professional officer class to organize complicated battle plans. The only option had to be something simple.
So you've got this group of part-time, self-funded, relatively untrained farmers who need to defend their homes. What's the most efficient way to do that? The answer, almost inevitably, was the phalanx. It's a wall of shields and spears. Each man protects the guy next to him, and they all move forward like a single terrifying machine. It took guts for sure, but it didn't require years of complex training. It was really the only logical solution they had. And this system created what we call linear warfare. The goal wasn't to be clever, it was to be a bulldozer. You line up, you charge straight ahead, and you smash into the other guy's line as hard as you possibly can. It's a brutal pushing match, and whichever side holds together and doesn't break wins. It's war as a straight line from point A to point B.
And here's the kicker. Only after this practical, efficient system was in place did the culture get built around it. You read this quote from the Spartan poet Tertius, and you see how these ideals of honor, of staring death in the face, of personal courage, they became attached to this way of fighting. The culture didn't invent the phalanx. The culture grew up to give meaning to the brutal reality their political system had created.
Okay, now let's jump across the globe to warring states China. Here, the locus of power is on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. It's all in the hands of the state, of the monarch.
In China, the state had basically zero constraints. It controlled everything: the land, the resources, the people. The state could draft huge, professional, full-time armies. It could train those soldiers for years in all kinds of complex tactics. It could fund massive factories to churn out advanced weapons like the crossbow. So, once you take all those physical limitations away, warfare is free to become something else, something intellectual, something philosophical.
And the result wasn't one single predictable tactic like the phalanx. No, the result was a whole sophisticated philosophy of conflict, famously captured in books like Sun Tzu's The Art of War. It was a system built on being adaptable, on being formless, on using your mind as your number one weapon.
One of the core ideas was this dance between what they called Cheng, or orthodox tactics, and Qi, the unorthodox. So the orthodox move is the direct, obvious one, the attack the enemy sees coming. You might use that to pin them in place, but victory came from the unorthodox, the Qi. That's the surprise attack on the flank, the clever deception, the move they never, ever saw coming. The true art was blending the two seamlessly.
And Sun Tzu just nails the whole philosophy with this quote. The goal is to be infinitely adaptable. Think about that. It's the exact opposite of the Greeks, whose flanks battle was brutally repetitive. The Chinese ideal was to never fight the same way twice. Warfare became this non-linear game of chess, where outthinking your opponent was the ultimate victory, sometimes without even needing a big battle.
So at this point, you're probably thinking, okay, I get it, but isn't this really just about their cultures? You know, the individualistic Greeks versus the collectivist Chinese? And that's a totally fair question, but if we stop there, we might just miss the real story.
I mean, the argument that Greek culture with its focus on individual heroes led to the phalanx, while Chinese culture with its focus on the group led to these massive obedient armies, it sounds right, doesn't it? It feels intuitive. But this analysis argues that that's putting the cart way before the horse.
And this slide right here, this is the big twist. The common view, the one we all kind of assume, is that a society's culture determines its style of warfare. But the argument here completely flips that on its head. It says the locus of power determines the most efficient style of warfare, and then the culture develops to justify and make sense of it. Culture isn't the cause, it's the effect.
Let's make that super clear. In Greece, the political reality of having citizen soldiers created the phalanx out of pure necessity. Then, they layered on all these cultural ideals about individual honor and athletic competition to turn this brutal chore into something noble. Same deal in China. The political reality of an all-powerful monarch created these huge state-run armies. Then, philosophies like legalism, with its tough punishments, and Confucianism, with its focus on duty, came along to reinforce the absolute obedience you need to make that system work. Culture basically became the software that runs on the hardware of political reality.
So, let's pull back. We've been deep in the weeds of ancient history. What's the big takeaway from all this? Why does comparing these two ancient superpowers matter to us, right here, right now?
At the end of the day, the crucial point is this. Before you can ever understand how a country fights, you first have to understand its political structure. How power is divided between the government and its people is the starting point for everything. It sets the rules of the game. When society has more control, like in Greece, warfare tends to become simpler, more physical. When the state has all the control, like in China, it opens the door for war to become this complex intellectual game. And culture? Culture is the story we tell ourselves later to explain why we do it that way.
And that leaves us with a really powerful final thought. This ancient model, it's not just about history. It's a lens we can use to look at our own world. From democracies that have to worry about public opinion and rely on citizen soldiers, to authoritarian states that can command their entire population with a single decree. This isn't about hoplites and crossbows anymore. It's a timeless way to see that deep, unbreakable link between how we govern ourselves and how we go to war. And it forces us to ask, what constraints are our political systems putting on us right now, and what kind of conflicts are they already shaping for our future?